an oversight is too diluted of a word to describe Jess Phillips writing to the council and saying this is not a national issue, you can sort it out by yourselves. That of Oldham Council voted and decided that they could not mark their own homework and they needed it to be done by an outside organisation. They needed it to be on a national level. The reason they said that is because this scandal was perpetrated by people who worked alongside the council, with the council. It was so entwined and entangled that they don't feel they can prepare a fair report. And now there's been loads of talk about, well, we've had so many inquiries, and we can go through them if you like to in a minute. We've had loads of inquiries, and we've had this huge landmark report by Professor J a couple of years ago, and there's all these recommendations. Labour only committed to implementing those recommendations this Sunday at 1 p.m. That's when the press release came out. Labour had no plan to implement or fast track those recommendations before this furore online. And they can backtrack as much as they want now, and they can say, no, we cared. You didn't. Otherwise, you would have done it day one when you got into office.
I suppose neither of the Conservatives didn't implement the J report. I think that's maybe what is particularly distasteful about the furore, is the way the Conservatives and other people are kind of using this opportunistically. I think someone said, I texted you about it, was it at the weekend, saying someone had tweeted all these journalists and commentators saying, you have never tweeted about grooming gangs, as if that person had. This isn't a new scandal. Obviously, it should be, these things should be implemented and it should be taken incredibly seriously, and it's a massive injustice that it hasn't been. But it is, like we talked about, Duncan Robinson, it's the politics of noticing things. This is the latest Westminster scandal. This has all been in the public domain for a decade.
Yeah, predates our time in journalism.
Yeah.
But I see the thing that annoyed me about the Labour response, which was, well, look at the Conservatives. They had however many years to implement all of these recommendations and they never did. It's like, that doesn't solve anything. At the heart of this, you've got they were described in the report as working class girls who were exploited by the system, police officers who didn't care about them, councillors who didn't care about them, care workers who didn't care about them, and put them at times in harm's way. Those girls, how does it help them if at the top we're arguing about, well, Badenoch should have pushed for an inquiry sooner, or, Boris Johnson yapped about spaffing money up the wall? It doesn't help them.
Yeah, I think you can make that political football point about, well, basically every political faction that touches this issue, from the far right through to the Labour Party. Because when you look at the evidence, if you like, the Home Office has looked at whether or not there was a connection between ethnicity and child sexual exploitation, which is grooming gangs by their proper name, and found that white men were the most common perpetrators, that white people were the most common perpetrators. But adding on top of that it was virtually impossible to come to any meaningful conclusion, regardless of whether or not the data sets were complete, and they were incomplete, because of the simple fact that 75% of survivors do not ever tell anyone about what happened to them. You can never come to a meaningful conclusion about the ethnic makeup of the people that abuse children, because 3/4 of the people that get abused will never tell anyone that they've been abused. Even if we did record the ethnicity of every recorded offender, every recorded person that was charged, every recorded person that got convicted, you're still only working with 25% of the data set. So you can never come to a meaningful conclusion. So anyone that, whether it's Suella Braverman, whether it's Tommy Robinson, that wants to make light of the fact that there are British Pakistani men involved in this, yeah, British Pakistani men have been involved in it. But the second you draw you try to draw any conclusion from that, you're exposing yourself. You're exposing yourself for your prejudice, and you're exposing yourself about your will to discriminate. Priti Patel, actually, she wrote the foreword to that report commissioned by the Home Office I mentioned, and it is dripping with disappointment. She's like, I've got the quote down here somewhere. She said the findings were disappointing because community and cultural factors are clearly relevant to understanding and tackling offending, and implied that with better data collection, including in relation to ethnicity, the findings would have been different. It's like, no. It wouldn't have been. Yeah, okay. If you were able to somehow get 100% of the people, but you can't. It was almost like she wanted the evidence to follow her politics rather than the other way around. It wasn't her politics following the evidence.
Because you could extrapolate any common variable.
Yeah.
From those men. Like, one thing they have in common, they're all paedophiles.
Yeah.
That's probably most important
I think
thing.
that's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, they're all gangs of paedophiles.
But also, you're right. It's like context and opportunity, right? It's the nighttime economy. I think that's probably someone has an individual propensity to abuse children, right? One, but the second part is the opportunity, right? And if you work at an off license, you drive a cab, these vulnerable children who are out late at night, aren't supervised, aren't being looked after, that provides you the window of opportunity to abuse. And that perhaps, I'm not saying this is the case, I'm not an expert in this, but maybe the common denominator being all of the perpetrators' involvement in the nighttime economy might be more relevant to understanding the nature of the offending rather than the fact that in some of the cases of these gangs, they were British Pakistani men.
I don't know how helpful it is that Twitter has got or embroiled in this argument. I think I find myself very disappointed in the left and the left's reaction to the grooming gang scandal, because I think that you have put that perfectly, but I don't know if anyone else has bothered to actually think about it. They've some of the most prominent left-wing commentators were totally silent on this for a good couple of days when the GB News piece first came out, because in their head, it's a right-wing issue. It's not something that they should touch. It's a racism issue, point blank, and we're not going to... In any other scenario, if it hadn't been, pushed to the forefront by someone like GB News, the left would be all over it, because at its base, it's violence against women and girls.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I just I don't really understand that cognitive disconnect. It's like, do you lot not know how to feel about something until you've been told how to feel about something, or been told that it's okay to be angry? It's like, I don't understand why this grooming gang scandal is such a bizarre political hot potato. If everyone actually just got together and was like, do you know what, we hate paedophiles, pretty baseline.
Quite a common thing in this country.
Quite a common thing.
We've been trying to build that consensus with this podcast for many years now. And I think we're finally starting to make some headway. Yeah, look, you hit the nail on the head, Ava. The way to approach this from a socially progressive critique is one that engages with sort of structural misogyny, right? That is what it is. Is in a country where 1 in 3 schoolgirls report being sexually harassed while they're wearing their school uniform. That, for me, is probably a more revealing statistic than the percentage of the ethnic makeup of any of the offenders, because it's happening in the context of institutionalized misogyny. You know, there are plenty of people who drive cabs and don't form rape gangs. Do you know what I mean? There are plenty of people.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people who see a vulnerable young girl on the street and make a decision to help her rather than to hurt her. And if you don't address I wouldn't even call it the blatant sexism that characterizes people that abuse women in this way, you're not going to get anywhere. Like you can't. And so I think, you know, particularly people who are trying to make hay of it, be it Tommy Robinson, be it Suella Braverman, whoever, you know, it's a conversation, or the challenge to them is about victims, because they are so keen to foreground the perpetrators.
I think that's where the argument that the police and the people involved were kind of too woke to help these
complete
people.
Horseshit.
We're like, it falls short, because what's the police? Not woke. Were the police woke?
No, they're two-tier, Ed. It's two-tier care and it's woke policing.
But like, as in what? The Metropolitan Police was found to be institutionally sexist, racist, misogynistic, and also was too woke to arrest any Asian paedophiles.
Yeah, and also, by the way, like, routinely, statistically, evidentially proven to over-police and aggressively over-police black and brown men. So,
I think what's interesting, if you think about the police force and you think about the foreword that Priti Patel wrote to that report, it does stop short of criticising outright the police. And if you actually read the evidence that's submitted to the report, time and time again, it's the police officers who dropped these girls back to where they were being assaulted, or, you know, weren't taking action swiftly or in the manner that they should have done, that they, you know, using the apparatus that they could have had access to. And then you look at other police forces around the country. You look at the Dame Louise Casey report and what she wrote about the Metropolitan Police, about it being institutionally racist and institutionally misogynistic. And you go, well, okay, on one hand, we can go, dirty, disgusting paedophiles had access to these children. On the other hand, you go, why is it up and down the country, every single time we have an inquiry, the finger always seems to land back on the police? Why have you lot failed once again?
Yeah. And it connects to that misogyny point, right? Because, as you said, they were dropping them back there, or they would say that, the girls, the victims, were asking for it or making bad choices, weren't credible witnesses, and so dismissed their claims and their accusations. And I think this connects to the sort of the difficulty for a lot of people with child sexual exploitation, which is different from child sexual abuse. The exploitation being sort of, I can't remember the exact definition, but it's essentially like someone in a position of power making the most of that imbalance, either through coercion or persuasion, to then sexually abuse someone. The police couldn't understand that if one of the girls was, for example, being given an iPhone or a bottle of vodka, or was gaining social status by being associated with these men, that she was being abused. They couldn't comprehend the fact, well, she's financially benefiting from having sex with these people, so how can she be abused? It's like, no, very clearly, that if I'm picking a number, but let's say a 16-year-old girl is having sex with like a 40-year-old man, he could have given her £1 million. I don't care. Like there's a very, very serious conversation that has to be had there at that point, and that's the sort of I think the part that a lot of people struggled, and where the kind of bias and inability and the cover-up started, was that essentially the women weren't taken seriously when they came forward with their claims, and that's why it took so long to get to where it was.
It's an interesting contrast with how the police or social services might treat someone being groomed by a county lines gang, in terms of they'd be getting favours from older men. But I actually don't know for certain, but I would imagine a lot of the children involved in county lines gang are boys. And so there's no misogyny involved in that. There's like you see that person as a young boy being exploited to do dreadful things.
But they fail them on that as well, don't they? Yeah.
But I think there obviously is a county lines gang scandal, but has it been a failing on this level?
Yeah.
I think far more important than anyone's ethnicity is misogyny, its power imbalance, its opportunity, like genuinely opportunity to offend. And probably the baseline underlying all of it is a complete disregard for the well-being of children. Do you know what I mean? At its most base level, it's failing to recognise that the people who are being sexually abused are children.
Well, but there was a big class element to this as well, wasn't there? 100%. As well, because they were working class children, and they were the police. Well, they thought they were scum. They did. They and we can say they didn't think they were credible witnesses. What you mean by that is when a nice posh girl says this happened to me, perhaps they take more note than when a working class girl does.